What if you could print your own fortune? Not earn it, just make it. One man did exactly that and got away with it. Frank Bourassa had a mind wired for risk and reward. He wasn't drawn to the mundane. He craved the adrenaline of high-stakes gambles where fortune hinged on bold moves. Whether in business or life, he chased opportunities that teetered on the edge of risk, knowing the real thrill wasn't just winning, it was playing the game. Growing up in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, he struggled with the rigid structure of school. It felt slow, repetitive, and pointless, dragging out explanations that seemed obvious to him. Bored and uninterested, he was drawn to more exciting pursuits. In high school, he noticed classmates making money by stealing clothes and selling them. Seeing an opportunity, he decided to get involved, reselling stolen merchandise for a profit. This early taste of illicit business was his first step into the criminal world. Eventually, school expelled him, and he turned his focus to something that actually held his interest: cars. Becoming a mechanic gave him the kind of hands-on problem-solving he loved. He threw himself into the trade, opening his own garage, and later, an entire factory dedicated to manufacturing brake parts. The business was demanding, but that only fueled his drive. Working nearly around the clock, he found satisfaction in the complexity of running his own company, but the relentless work schedule took a toll. Pushing himself to exhaustion, his body eventually shut down. A complete burnout left him physically drained and mentally overwhelmed, forcing him to reevaluate everything. Struggling with debilitating symptoms, he spent years trying to understand what was happening to him, going from doctor to doctor without answers. When he finally got a diagnosis, severe panic attacks, he became determined to beat them. He sold his business, took time off, and traveled, allowing himself to recover. When he returned to Canada, he needed to figure out his next move. Traditional jobs didn't appeal to him, and he didn't want the stress of running another business. So, he revisited an old side hustle, selling weed. This time, he expanded quickly, setting up a highly profitable operation. But the success didn't last. A police investigation led to his arrest, and he was placed on house arrest for 3 months. With plenty of time to think, he realized that simply running another business, legal or not, wasn't the answer. He wanted something bigger, something that could generate wealth without the endless grind. That's when the idea hit him. One night, sitting at a red light, everything became clear. The ultimate shortcut had been staring him in the face all along. Instead of working for money, why not just make money? Not by earning it, but by physically producing it, counterfeiting. He knew nothing about counterfeiting money when he started, but he had questions, lots of them. What made real money real? What security features did it have? What paper, ink, and printing techniques were used? His research had to be flawless because any mistake could get him caught. The first decision was which currency to counterfeit. He quickly settled on US dollars, accepted everywhere, from high-end shopping malls to back-alley deals. Then came the denomination. The $100 bill might seem like the best choice, but it drew too much scrutiny. The $20 bill, however, was the perfect balance, common enough to fly under the radar, yet still valuable. To learn about US currency, Frank started researching online, but feared his searches could be tracked. So he used public computers at coffee shops. His first stop, the US Secret Service website, which ironically provided detailed information on security features designed to stop counterfeiters. From watermarks and color-shifting ink to embedded security threads, every defense mechanism was outlined. The US Treasury's Bureau of Engraving and Printing website was even more helpful, detailing how banknotes were made, from engraving metal plates to layering ink with specialized printing presses. The biggest challenge wasn't the visuals, it was the feel. Real US bills are printed on a 75% cotton, 25% linen blend, with ink that creates a distinctive raised texture. A simple counterfeit detection pen could expose a fake instantly if the paper wasn't right. He put in thousands of hours researching and planned to print $250 million in fake $20 bills. His plan? sell each for $6 to criminal contacts, turning his operation into a $75 million payday. Now, he needed the right equipment. The heart of the operation was an offset printing press, the same type used for newspapers and magazines. Finding one required expert help, so Frank fabricated a cover story. He had a contract to print shampoo pamphlets. With this lie, he found an industry insider who helped him purchase a used Heidelberg 4-color offset press, an enormous machine capable of professional-grade printing. Next, he needed a secure location. He rented a warehouse from a local farmer on a no-questions-asked basis. The nondescript building had no windows and minimal outside attention, the perfect hideout. With the press delivered and doors shut, Frank was ready to become an expert. He practiced obsessively. Every dial, every adjustment, every ink variation had to be mastered. He wasn't just learning to print, he was learning to counterfeit with absolute precision. When he finally got it right, he knew. He wasn't just making fake money, he was making perfect money. Ink was the next challenge. Standard CMYK inks were easy to buy, but color-shifting ink, the one that changed from copper to green, was a different story. Finding a way to replicate this would be one of his final, crucial obstacles before production could begin. Producing counterfeit bills isn't just about printing, it's about replicating every intricate detail. Frank Bourassa spent countless hours analyzing high-resolution images of $20 bills, ensuring his metal plates were perfect. By the time he was done, he understood every nuance of the currency. With the printer, ink, and plates ready, only one major hurdle remained: the paper. After an exhaustive search, he found a small Swiss paper company willing to accommodate him. He subtly introduced each feature one at a time to avoid suspicion, first requesting the cotton-linen blend, then adding security fibers and chemical properties mimicking real banknote paper. The watermark was another challenge. U.S. bills feature Andrew Jackson's face, an unmistakable giveaway. Frank outsourced the watermark drum to a foreign manufacturer unfamiliar with Jackson's image. To them, it was just another portrait, no different than any corporate logo. Once complete, he sent the drum to the paper mill, which incorporated it without question. The paper was shipped to Montreal under a false name, but retrieving it safely was a new challenge. Frank assumed authorities might be tracking the shipment and took extreme precautions. He scouted the port for days, observing activity around his cargo. Seeing no red flags, he initiated the pickup using multiple vehicles and hired drivers. As an added precaution, he arranged for a staged traffic jam on a bridge, forcing any potential tailing cars to stop. The truck carrying the paper was then driven aimlessly for a while before being parked in a random lot for 3 days, under surveillance, to detect any tracking devices or unusual attention. Nothing surfaced. For an extra layer of security, his team meticulously inspected every box and pallet before transferring the paper into a different truck. Confident it was clean, Frank personally drove it to his print shop. The biggest challenge was now behind him. He had successfully acquired the perfect counterfeit banknote paper without raising suspicion. With all the components in place, the final phase could begin. With the printing complete, Frank needed to move his counterfeit cash, but not in the U.S. He tapped into his criminal network, targeting drug traffickers who exported overseas. Europe, Asia, and Africa were safer markets. To gain trust, he distributed free samples, proving the quality of his bills. Frank set his price at 30 cents on the dollar, $3,000 in real money for $10,000 of his fake bills. Buyers were cautious at first, but once they saw how convincing the bills were, demand picked up. Frank had burned through his last cent to get to this stage, so every sale mattered. He handled the first deals through intermediaries, minimizing risk, and kept transactions small initially to build credibility. As clients returned for larger purchases, profits soared. Frank recouped his $300,000 investment quickly, and now it was all profit. If he could sell his entire inventory, he stood to make $75 million. To keep operations secure, he used runners to transport cash from hidden stashes, ensuring no single person had full knowledge of the operation. However, distribution was slower than expected. His 4 main clients weren't moving the money fast enough. Frank decided to bring in a 5th buyer, introduced through an associate. This new connection, Eric, ran a gang dealing in stolen construction equipment. Eric had a buyer eager for fake cash, and soon, purchases became daily. Usually, Frank let his runners handle deliveries, but he broke protocol to personally oversee this new deal. At the time, he was living with his girlfriend, but he kept her entirely in the dark about his operation. The less she knew, the safer she was. The counterfeit bills began circulating, first appearing in Illinois and Michigan strip clubs, before spreading to grocery stores and restaurants along the East Coast. They were so well made that they often passed multiple hands before detection. Then, on May 23, 2012, at 5 a.m., Frank woke to the sound of heavy pounding at his girlfriend's house. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police had surrounded the property. In an instant, he knew. It was over. He was met by a flood of officers. They searched everything, seizing nearly $1 million in counterfeit 20s from his safe, along with specialized printing equipment. The raid was part of Project Cranium, a joint effort by the RCMP, Quebec Provincial Police, and the U.S. Secret Service. Authorities labeled Frank's operation highly sophisticated, with bills nearly impossible to detect with the naked eye. In the interrogation room, Frank remained silent. He had spent years meticulously planning this scheme and wasn't about to give the police an easy win. But then, they brought up his girlfriend. Since the house was in her name, they threatened to charge her as well. And that changed everything. Frank was in a tight spot. Authorities charged him with fabricating, possessing, and distributing counterfeit money. Since it was U.S. currency, they threatened to extradite him to the U.S., where he could face up to 60 years in prison. Frank later learned that the buyer, Eric, had unknowingly been dealing with an undercover Canadian cop, which ultimately led to Frank's arrest. He had a choice: stay silent and risk his girlfriend getting charged, or confess and try to keep her out of it. He chose to talk, admitting he was behind the entire operation and that she had no involvement. After his confession, Frank was denied bail and stuck in jail. He had always known that law enforcement's sole job was to shut operations like his down. He had prepared for this possibility and had a lawyer ready. That lawyer immediately got to work, fighting Frank's extradition to the U.S. The key argument? The RCMP lacked concrete surveillance footage of him handling the money. A helicopter had been monitoring one of his transactions, but Frank had parked under a structure, blocking their view. That gap in the footage was enough to get extradition thrown out. And after 6 weeks in jail, Frank secured bail for $10,000. But he still had to face Canadian courts, where he was looking at serious time. Since this was his first counterfeiting offense, his lawyer worked on negotiating a deal. Frank had printed $250 million in fake bills, but had only sold a few million. He knew something the authorities didn't. They hadn't found his remaining stash, $200 million in counterfeit cash still hidden away. His plan was simple: get his sentence reduced as much as possible, then use that money as leverage to cut an even better deal. Court appearance after court appearance, his lawyer chipped away at the potential sentence, reducing it from decades to just a handful of years. But Frank still refused the plea deal. The prosecution lost patience and declared they were taking him to trial. That was when Frank played his ace. He told his lawyer about the hidden $200 million and asked if it could be used for negotiation. His lawyer agreed to try. But before revealing its location, Frank needed to move it. He had a truck parked in a city lot for months. Inside were pallets of fake 20s and his Heidelberg printing press. Once everything was in place, he was ready to deal. On the first day of trial, Frank's lawyer dropped the bombshell. His client was willing to turn over $200 million in counterfeit bills if the charges were dropped. The court was stunned. They thought they had seized everything. Realizing they had more to gain from taking the money than punishing Frank, the Crown agreed to negotiate. On January 31st, 2014, the drop date arrived. Frank retrieved a keyring hidden behind a tree and handed it to his lawyer in court. Authorities were furious. They wanted him to lead them to the money, so they had him drive, flanked by a convoy of police vehicles. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Arriving at the parking lot, Frank pointed them to the box truck. The bomb squad swept it first, making him unlock it and start the engine. Finally, officers stepped inside. Stacked pallets filled with fake 20s lined the truck, along with his printing press. The authorities were stunned. They hadn't seen anything like it. Even after confirming the find, they had one more request. Frank had to drive the truck himself to RCMP headquarters. Surrounded by black SUVs and helicopters, he made the trip. The irony wasn't lost on him. A day earlier, possessing this money was a crime. Now, because of a deal, it was completely fine. In the end, Frank walked away with no counterfeiting charges. The only consequence was a $1,500 fine for a minor drug offense. His co-conspirator Eric, however, was sentenced to 31 months for unrelated crimes. After the case, Frank went legit, turning his counterfeiting expertise into a career in security consulting. He now advises companies on how to prevent the very thing he once mastered.